Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We are still missing one guest, but hoping he will join us soon. Anyway, today is, of course, the 80th anniversary of Operation Chastise, or the Dambusters raid. Social media has been full of coverage, and I've seen events, shirts, podcasts, features, news features all day. And it was unquestionably a demonstration of incredible flying by brave crews, dropping bombs that were ingenious, and it is a story we are all familiar with. But are we asking ourselves the right questions about the raid and its legacy? Joining me are two, and hopefully a third, brilliant historians who will be answering some of those questions. So good evening, Dan and James. I won't bother to introduce who you are. People know who you are. Hopefully Rob will join us later on. But like me, guys, you've seen the coverage all day. It's almost been unrelentless, isn't it?
Yeah, there's been so much and so many takes. It's definitely getting a lot of attention and seems to have captured people, doesn't it?
Certainly, Dan. Yeah, you've seen a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been expecting it because it's been building up for so long. But it's just been incredible how much people are doing, and thanks for the people who are tuning in to watch this, because I know there's a fair bit of choice out there.
And we are, we said it before going live, and hopefully Rob will join us. We are a little bit nervous about this conversation because it is such an important part of World War II to lots of people. They have I don't know if you can have fond of memories of an event they didn't even live through, but it is held with some affection as well as the admiration for the crews. It's something people feel a connection to. They almost have an ownership of it, which is interesting. So we're going to put our first question up, and we've got 5 of them, and we're not going to have time to deal with your questions coming in today, viewers. We will watch your comments in the sidebar, but I think we've got quite a lot to get through, so we will just kind of focus on the questions we've agreed. So I'll start with there's my just introduction screen there, but we'll start with question number is, why is the UK obsessed with the Dams raid 80 years on, and indeed is it just the UK? So I'll turn that to you first, Dan, because you work professionally in an environment where Bomber Command and their exploits are integral to what you do with the archives there. So why is the UK obsessed, and is it just the UK?
Yes, I think it is just the UK, although if you want to add in Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, anyone who flew with Bomber Command. Why? I think a lot of it is to do with the film. A lot of it is to do with the continuation of the propaganda that was put out following the operation during the war itself. I think it's become a symbol. It's become like the poster boy for Bomber Command, and it's seen in this country in particular as an unproblematic story. It's the symbol of the Dambusters. Seems to be, it seems to be quite unproblematic. The 19 aircraft are flown by these very incredible, brave, skillful men, and to all intents and purposes, if you watch the film, they're attacking an inanimate piece of concrete, or several inanimate pieces of concrete. The enemy are all but invisible, and there's no real thought in the film, certainly, about anybody who's underneath the bombs and who's underneath the dams and caught up in the flooding. So, the history of bombing is difficult heritage. It's difficult history. It's problematic. There are two sides, and it's telling an unpleasant story. Telling the story of the Dambusters operation in this way, it's almost as if, as I said, it's like Luke Skywalker destroying the Death Star. There's great risk and there's great skill, but it seemingly, other than the death and destruction amongst the air crews, it's touchy-feely history. Nothing much happened. We can just move on. They were heroes, and we don't have to concern ourselves. We don't have to worry about the death and the destruction on the ground, because people just don't think about it.
And I know one of the things Rob will hopefully make, thanks for that, Dan, if he joins us, is the idea that everything I've seen in the coverage today has not really mentioned reconciliation or the relationship between the UK and Germany, and what any kind of mutual events to commemorate these events. It's all sort of just the British RAF version of the story. So James, same question to you. Why is the UK obsessed with the Dams raid, and do you think it's just the UK?
I agree with Dan. I think the UK is big with this, but I think you have to include kind of Canada and Australia and such like as well. I think the Second World War in general, we in Britain still have a massive fascination with, and we share this collective and cultural memories of the war. And this is a part of it. There are events that are specially selected. And when it comes to the air war, when it comes to Bomber Command, I think the Dambusters is the one that's remembered most. I think, again, agreeing with Dan, the film plays a big part. And I completely agree with the fact that there is this distancing, you know, there is this attacking the inanimate objects. And you mentioned the attack on the Death Star. The film was an inspiration for those scenes in A New Hope. So, yeah, it is that othering. And when you have the flooding, I think you see a train knocked over by water and you see a few factory workers running away. But the actual destruction and aftermath isn't really seen or addressed. It would be a very, very different film if it was made now. You know, it's still in the throngs of the 1943 reports and newspapers and such like. Why is it remembered above other raids? Well, yeah, there are the extraordinary elements that we know about, but I guess the fact that there is this crazy idea of a bouncing bomb, and even this touch of British eccentric nature of Barnes Wallis using a bathtub in the front garden to design, you know, a weapon that can potentially win the war. It just screams of British ingenuity and links with identity and such like, which I think people jump on, which probably isn't with other raids. You know, if you talk about, I came on World War II TV and talked about the Dortmund Ems Canal raid in 1940. It's low level, it's over water, it's 5 group. Guy Gibson was nearly selected for it. It was selected crew, specially adapted weapon. There was a VC, but hardly anyone's talking about it. You know, it's right in the middle of the Battle of Britain to stop the invasion barges coming across. Why? The things that are missing are there isn't this crazy weapon and there isn't a film about it. You know, and I think you can say that about other raids that tick some of the boxes.
Yeah, it's interesting what he's saying about Barnes Wallis. You know, yes, he probably was eccentric, but he's not an eccentric inventor working away in his shed and losing his marbles. He's not Doc Emmett Brown from Back to the Future. He's part of the industrial complex. He's working for Vickers. He designed the Wellington. He's a Pucker scientist. And again, the story that is very, very popular is that here it's sort of the British bumbling along and muddling through and succeeding, almost by accident. And you know, that's not quite the actual story.
No, definitely, and I know it doesn't look like Rob will be able to join us. He's trying. His router's saying all sorts of weird things. He's going to try again, but I don't know. We're going to see him. We'll have to try and bring him in sometime for a follow up. But we know some of the points he wanted to make, and you said it, both of you there, that Germany. And this is the point Rob will make, so I'm making it in lieu of him being here, is they certainly don't see this as a separate raid to others. They see the bomber offensive as one big thing, and they don't have anything where they look at this particular raid with any uniqueness. And although he did make like page 5 of one of the German newspapers. Then Rob is a German living in the UK, by the way, folks, if you're not aware of that. And they had found someone living who remembered the aftermath, remembered the flooding, but it didn't make kind of headline news. It wasn't on the front pages. It wasn't on the television. So he wanted to kind of talk about the fact that Germany certainly doesn't see it as anything outside of another raid that brought about misery on the German population, just like the Luftwaffe raids must say brought misery to the British and other populations. So it is what bombing raids do. But so I think we've addressed that one there. Let's move on to question number 2, which is that obsession problematic? And if so, why? And I'll kind of just give my answer first, as now it looks like I am being kind of the third panelist for a while. I think you both said it there. We've got the memory of the TV commercials. There's kind of this jokey, it comes up in sitcoms, it comes up in cartoons. We're remembering jokes about it alongside the actual raid itself. So the British have carefully crafted a version of this that is increasing the eccentricity of Barnes Wallis, emphasizing the bravery of the crews. And as you said there very, very early on, Dan, it's about, we've remembered it bombing a dam. We've remembered it hitting dams. We haven't talked about it the effect of that and the fact that 1,400 civilians or something were killed by the result of those dams. So I'll go to you first this time, James. So, you know, you do a lot of RAF presentations. You know, this is your big thing. Is it problematic? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, that the influence I think of, you mentioned the film and such, like, can have on the collective memory. I mean, you have this in history with general, is you can have historians having one conversation, and what's happening in the public area is something completely different. And of course, they meet and sometimes they clash when it comes to anniversaries. There are discussions, and this is an incredibly nuanced subject. There's in some angles that haven't been considered, and I think the way that the Dambusters myth and such, like, in British culture, it's almost a bit sort of like, you got to tread carefully on this, because some, you know, there's an ownership to it. I'm not saying everyone's like that, but some people are, and it's just a case of, okay, we can have a look at this. You know, we can have a rethink of this. I don't think it's just with the Dambusters. I think there's many events in history, and even the Second World War, that still have this. And it's something that, when I've done talks and when I've highlighted things, I've wanted to talk about other raids. I haven't really touched on the Dambusters before, because there has been so much coverage. I want to talk about, you know, the other 125,000 aircrew of Bomber Command. I want to talk about the WAFs. I want to talk about the ERCs. I want to talk about the collective memory. I want to talk about what's happening on the ground as well, and the memories there. So, yeah.
I mean, it's almost like the first Band of Brothers, and the Band of Brothers did that same thing for one company, the 101st Airborne, that meant that other units kind of got forgotten. And Dambusters, you know, the film back in the 1950s, it meant that, I suppose, 633 Squadron gave Mosquitoes a bit of a boost a decade later, but the Dambusters is on in the UK pretty much all the time. And folks, if you're around the world, there are people already saying they've never seen the film. So clearly, in other countries, it doesn't just do the rounds like it does in the UK. And it's been I've had a video edition of it, and a DVD and a Blu-ray, and I've got a digital version on my computer. So, you know, it's been perennially available. But Dan, you know, you're working with archives. You're trying with your resource to tell the stories of Bomber Command and right across the globe for all eras of the war. So same question to you. Is it problematic? And if so, why?
Well, again, agreeing with James, it's the way it's remembered, and it's the way that parts of it are forgotten that's problematic. So we don't think about the 1,600 plus who were killed in the floodwater. Dr. Victoria Taylor did a really interesting master's thesis on it. I think it was published 2017, and she looked at the way the bombing raid has been remembered, and she broke it into 3 chapters. So the first chapter, she looked at the propaganda during the war itself and how it was remembered during the 1940s. And then the second chapter, she takes it from the end of the war up until I think it was the 80s. And then the third chapter, she looks at the way the operation's been remembered from the 80s up until she was writing up in 2016, 2017. And the thing that's really important is that the way it is remembered is fluid. It isn't set in stone. It is always changing. The way it's being remembered and the way it's being used is always changing. And you know, I think it has become ramped up more for lots of reasons, probably some of which we shouldn't go into. But yeah, one of the reasons is because the veterans are passing away, and there are no more veterans who can actually remember this thing. And with the work that I do in the archive, members of the public, veterans' families, they see it as a symbol for what Bomber Command did. And of course, the history and memory of Bomber Command is quite problematic, and people see this as relatively straightforward one. Although, as we're trying to say, it's much more difficult than that, much more complicated than that. I mean, we've got a letter in the archive that I was looking at this morning that was written by somebody who was on another squadron, and they were writing home that they'd read the reports about the dams up in the news, and it is just another operation. Yes, it's a bit special, but it was The smashing of the dams is wonderful, and then it goes on to talk about the family and babies and things like that. So, during the war, it meant a different thing. We've got an interview with a WAF who was in the watch office at Scampton in May 43, and she says, on the recording, as far as I was concerned, it was simply another raid. So it does, the meaning does change as time goes on. The archives also got an interview with Mary Stopes Rowe, who was Barnes Wallis's daughter, and she sort of talks about it. This is obviously, she was interviewed in 2016, 2017, I think, but she talks about it as Barnes Wallis looking at it as almost, he was creating the bomb and attacking the dams, and also his work with the Tall Boys and the Grand Slams. He saw it as a sort of moral trolley problem. It's, do we try and shorten the war by killing this number of people in order to save other lives, further on down the line. So yeah, the way it's remembered is always changing.
I mean, it's an interesting point there, Dan, because we're going to have the new movie about the atomic bombs and Oppenheimer with Cillian Murphy coming out soon. And the US since 1945 have always had the discussion about the moral use of the atomic bombs alongside the practical use. But I don't think the UK has ever really had that moral conversation, at least not about the Dambusters raid. And we're not getting into Dresden and Pforzheim and stuff like that tonight. That's the wider offensive. But I don't think we've done that. But just for those of you watching who aren't in the UK or don't have social media, Dan provided some images and things that are kind of representative of the kind of thing that goes on in the UK, and that you can have a Dambusters beer festival. Now, and folks, you're entitled to think that's a bit of fun and it's just celebrating a bit of, as we talked about, ingenuity, but I see that, and it raises questions. I'm not totally uncomfortable with it, but I'm not totally comfortable with it either. And the way that I've seen T-shirts today. People have had commemorative T-shirts. There's the squadron codes there on car stickers and things like that. And then you provided this photo as well. We've got the one from the way the Germans remember it, which is perhaps very different in that this is. Tell us what this photo is. I put the text up there. So, Dan, because Dan, you provided this one.
So this is the sort of memorial interpretation board at the Mona Dam, and they're calling it the catastrophe. And it's by comparison, it's quite understated, and there's obviously there's no glorification to this at all, and I think that's kind of the thing that is problematic.
I mean, it's language, isn't it? I mean, the fact that the Germans say catastrophe and some people in Britain call it a celebration. And we have that in Normandy every June, is the use of words like commemoration and celebration. And what can you call what? A 1940s night can be a celebration of liberation, but a commemoration of death. Language is very important. But I think people are waiting for us to get to kind of the crux of the question, which is was the raid worth it? Because there's no question that the coverage I've seen today, guys, hasn't really talked about anything about the effect of the raid, just that it was amazing, just that the crews are fantastic. There was lots of loss of life, and we owe our thanks to those air crews that took off in those aircraft. They were part of the generation that helped win the war for us. Fantastic. And we doff our hats in memory of all crews who didn't come back. But in terms of how we measure success, we'll go to you first, James. So was it worth it? And how will you use the parameters you set your parameters of how you would measure success, how you would measure being worth it or not?
Gosh, I mean, you can come in from multiple. You can come in from multiple perspectives. I mean, yeah, you think about the targets and what was hit and the damage. And I mean, the Zorpa Dam wasn't breached; the Mona and Ada were. You can talk about the loss rate as well. About 50%. I don't know the exact percentage, but yeah, 50%, 8 out of 19. That's a high loss rate. That is far and above as a percentage what is expected. I mean, 10% is deemed anything above is not sustainable to carry on. You know, that's you don't want to go above that. So this is up there as as a really heavy raid. So in that sense, and you've got experienced crews being lost in the process. Yeah, there's lots of things. I mean, the big thing really is to remember that this is part of a wider campaign Bomber Command are in at the moment over the summer of 43, which is what Harris dubs the Battle of the Ruhr. This is about attacking the industrial heartland. And actually, if you consider the dams raid within that and you look at the material damage and such, like, it fits in, but it's not really doing anything that isn't happening anywhere else in terms of damage and resources being drained and use of manpower to repair things and such like. And of course, in July, you've got the firebombing of Hamburg, which is a tremendous drain on resources and such like, as well as other questions and such like. So it's part of a wider, bigger picture that's happening in 1943. And I mean, I've wrote down a couple of stats that I scribbled. It varied on where it was in the Ruhr, but sometimes waterworks were out for just an hour, others for up to 4 days. It's not absolutely catastrophic. By July, production was equal to that of May. Dortmund water fell to 20%, but was back to 80% in 3 days. It's not absolutely catastrophic. I mean, the both dams are repaired by September.
Yeah,
you know, it's a drain, absolutely, but it's part of a drain that's happening all over Germany and all over occupied Europe that Bomber Command is sustaining, you know. And yeah, I think it's difficult to measure, but we can't single it out as being extraordinary in the sense of impact that was done. It's part of an overall campaign.
Yeah, and also the Germans made a big deal of the propaganda of how fast they repaired. I mean, just almost weeks after the British are still, you know, the surviving part crews have been into London for tea and medals, and the newspapers have been following it all, you know, that side of it, and everybody's getting involved. But while that's happening, the Germans are already using their propaganda machine to demonstrate how quickly they are getting back into action. So to some point, both sides got propaganda value out of it. And we talk about it a lot on this channel about how you measure some of the commando raids. You know, do they have an actual effect on the outcome? But what they do definitely have is a boost for the morale of the people back home, that sense of striking back, of doing something ingenious, something a bit different, something that no one else has done before. It's the first of its type, the technology, it had that kind of effect. But Dan, we'll bring you in, and we're still hoping that Rob will join us, but maybe he won't. But Dan, was it worth it? And by what parameters will you use to define that?
Well, my answer is yes and no, because it's like everything; it's more complicated than that. Dr. Ross Mahoney tweeted this afternoon and made me chuckle. He sort of answered this question. He said it was tactically innovative, culturally significant, but strategically irrelevant. It wasn't followed up on. It was, as James said, it was part of the overall campaign. I think, you know, again, with my IVCC archivist hat on, it's the way it's remembered that's made it, you know, more important. But at the time, yes, propaganda was a big part of it. I mean, it's the first time really that the RAF can shout about being able to pull off a precision operation. This is, you know, coming after the Butt report, and they couldn't hit anything within 5 miles of where they are now. They're hitting something as small and difficult as a dam with a bomb that bounces. It's, you know, it's incredible. So the propaganda in the UK, the US, and the wider world is really important. We've got some letters from I forgot what town it is in Germany, but there's some letters that we're hopefully going to be getting into the archive. And in one of these letters, it's people writing in Germany about, you know, the aftermath of the operation, and they know something's happened because they're getting rumors about it, and they're actually saying, why isn't there anything in the press? Because immediately after the operation, I think there was a bit of a media blackout. So it's later on when the Germans are repairing that the you know, it hits their newspapers. So yeah, I mean, it's a thing that we, you know, you can always argue for ad infinitum about the success and the importance of the operation.
Well, you say that we can have it, but the question is, are we having it? You and I and James are having this conversation, but how many other people today, when they've been reading whatever social media thing they read, have had any kind of questions about that, apart from I'm noticing a lot of kind of flag waving and people feeling very proud of the achievements, and of course all of that is understandable, and that we said at the beginning of the show, unquestionably they were very brave crews, and unquestionably it was some incredible flying. But James, well, both of you can think of other raids that were equally demonstrating of incredible flying, if not more so. So just run 2 or 3 off the top of your head, James, that we don't talk about enough.
Well, one actually I spoke on World War II TV about was Eindhoven, the raid on the radio works there. Radio, well, I think it made up 60% of them for the Nazi right. I could be wrong. I don't have the figures in front of me. Out for 6 months. That's huge. That's a massive raid, and it's a precision attack. It's low level. It's in daylight, and it ticks a lot of boxes. One that I have talked about a lot is raid on Augsburg in April 1942. It nearly pulls off. There is a navigational error that means that there are heavy casualties for 44 Squadron, and they arrive early, and 97 Squadron come in and suffer as a consequence. But yeah, the factory is hit, but their bombs are duds, etc. But this is a daring raid. It's Lancasters again. It's low level, 5 group. So yeah, I think there are plenty of examples out there. And actually, one thing that I was thinking about a moment ago was, when it comes to the legacy and such like, actually a lot of what 617 Squadron did subsequently is overshadowed by the Dams raid. So you think about how they helped with deception raids with D-Day. You think about what they did with Tall Boy and attacking the V weapon sites and such like the aqueducts. A lot of people go, oh, I didn't know about that. It's so again, it's all part of that legacy and such like.
I mean, history, I said we wouldn't address questions, but this is a comment, really, and it is a valid one. History Explorer, who's going to be on next week talking about artillery. I do think it's astonishing. We say bomb that bounced across the water like it's normal, but what a fantastic innovation to skip a 4,000 kilogram bomb. So, yeah, when you put it like that, it was an incredible effort. And we now just know that they managed to spin these bombs and drop them. They bounced across the water and they rolled down the dam and they blew up the dam. So that is incredible. Nothing takes anything away from Barnes Wallis and the crew and Guy Gibson and the incredible ingenuity of that. But at the same time, as we said there are other perspectives to look at. There are other things, other raids we can look at that perhaps didn't show the same levels of ingenuity, but maybe had a more significant or at least equal impact. So Dan, what your point of view on this about
well, I just something that just struck me. You're talking about how incredible a bomb that bounces over the water. I mean, we've all skipped stones, and I think
true.
Michael Redgrave as Barnes Wallis in the film discusses that it wasn't his idea really; it was Nelson.
True. Yeah. Okay. Good point. Yeah.
I've suddenly become a Royal Naval historian. I should leave.
You're crossing the dark side, the watery side. Yeah.
Sorry. What were you really asking me?
I don't know. Well, I think. Well, I'm just enjoying the conversation. I'm glad that people are embracing it. No one told us off for being insulting a national memory, but we're getting. There's more questions we can come back to. I don't think Rob will be joining us. Hopefully, folks, I better bring him back. Maybe if we can get his technical issues sorted out, maybe bring him back Thursday, because Sarah Louise Miller now can't do Thursday, so maybe I can bring Rob back, and indeed the guys again, or just Rob back. We'll think about that. But we're 80 years on. We talk about historiography all the time. We are in an era where some historians across subjects, across wars, are reanalyzing things. We are taking what we thought we knew. Stephen Fisher, for example, is re-examining the Sword Beach story on D-Day. People have re-examined who was at fault at Market Garden. We're bringing the international efforts of the 14th Army, the fact that the great majority of that force were non-white, non-British. So we are able to look at events of the past and reevaluate them. In terms of the Dams raid, what needs reassessment and why? So I'll go to you first, James.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, and I think I'll probably stretch this to the overall memory of Bomber Command and the campaign and such, that is, I think there needs to be more from the German perspective, and definitely those voices brought forward. And I recently gave a talk about RF Bomber Command on TV and film, and probably one of the best productions, in my opinion, is Bomber by Len Dayton, because it tells multiple perspectives. It addresses Nazism, it addresses the clean Luftwaffe myth. It also looks at LMF, which I know Dan's done excellent work on. There's so many things discussed in such a short period, and it just comes from multiple angles. It's a world away from other films and other perspectives. And Len Dayton, a fantastic writer, did his research excellently when it came to it. And when it came to the radio production, you have interviews with veterans, with Luftwaffe night fighter pilots, with people that were bombed on the ground, and it just rounds this incredible story that then is up to the audience to judge. And really, there aren't any answers. It's just this such a complex, nuanced subject, and I think that's something that could perhaps be brought into the story. Linked to that is maybe talking about other squadrons, other raids, other things that happen from a Bomber Command perspective, and also talking about other individuals. Let's talk about the ERCs. Let's talk about the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. I know Sarah was going to be doing a talk on that, and hopefully she can down the line. These are things that I think we can definitely have a focus on.
Oh, definitely. And I think also look at it from an international point of view. Well, Philip Blood is on the sidebar. He lives in Germany. I've just sent him an invite in case he wants to join on and give a German voice in lieu of Rob not being able to join us. Phil lives over there. Maybe he can offer a perspective. That'd be interesting. But from my point of view, I live in Normandy, so people I think know that by now. But in June, I've seen over the last few decades, even the 22 years I've seen here, I've seen the Germans not really being welcome at events, or at least not kind of openly welcome, to now. That was an event last year, the year before, and I forget where it was, it doesn't matter. But the band that played all the national anthems, so they did the British, American, was a Luftwaffe band, and no one batted an eyelid. It was just interesting that over the years, the German presence in Normandy has increased. It wasn't a sudden arrive. It just gradually cranked up from being the odd dignitary there to a larger formation there, to being now German military come here. And it's all been for the benefit of understanding, because these great conversations happen from both sides. And I think, Dan, you must get international visitors coming coming and wanting to learn about Bomber Command. But I think we're not hearing the German voice or the European voice. Is that something that you think we need to see more of?
Oh, most definitely, and it's something that we're always really interested in. We're pushing to get more of in the IBCC digital archive. I mean, we've got one of my colleagues is Italian, so we've got an awful lot of Italian stories in the archive, but not enough Germans. Definitely not enough Germans. I was looking in there today. We've got a couple of interviews with people who were. Well, there's one guy who was a flat gunner who was posted to the dams area after the operation, to make sure it didn't happen again. But there's not enough, and certainly in this country, it is these multiple perspectives that make it really interesting, and that's the way forward, I think.
Definitely. Well, I don't know whether Phil saw my invite, but maybe he'll see it. But we can go back to question number 5, then we can go back and around the houses and go look at some of the points again if we want to. But final points they want to make, and I mean my final point, and I'll let you go, is that I feel that anybody who has, and I'm going to use the word, enjoy the coverage today, got something out of that coverage, that's fantastic. If you're British and you read those articles, and you looked at those tweets and those social media posts, it is something. The flying we can be proud of, the ingenuity we can be proud of collectively, but also let's not be afraid of confronting some of the harsh reality of World War II, that this was a raid that did kill civilians. Many of them were not directly involved in the war effort. They were just farmers who happened to live nearby, whose thousands of gallons of water just came crashing through their properties, and they were killed. And understand there's that aspect of it as well. But James, final points, because we're going through things a bit quicker because Rob didn't join us. So we're only half an hour in, but final points at the moment, or at least points for discussion now.
Gosh, where to start with this subject? Like I say, there's loads to take away. I think anybody, like you say, that's enjoyed, for want of a word, the coverage, what's been seen, etc. Anybody who's maybe looking at it and using it as a channel to remember the wider bombing war and remembering RAF Bomber Command and those on all sides, all over Europe, all over the world, in fact, that were killed as a result of bombing, to try and think that little bit wider. I think echoing what you've said, Woody, just thinking about whether it is about other raids, whether it is about other points in the war, whether it is about the destruction, and also actually, it was. I mean, there's a terrific film in the 1950s. Going back to film, it's on my mind. It's what I'm writing about at the moment. Appointment in London in the 1950s. I think not a lot of people have heard of that, but they would have heard of Dambusters. Watch that. You know, try and think. You do the usual. Watch the Dambusters. It's the anniversary, etc. Branch out, because things like Appointment in London, I think, are absolutely fantastic films. Yeah, that there are elements of it that are of its time, but you do get the German perspective with the defenses. You do get a addressing of morale and bravery and doing the right thing, and there's a strong female lead in it, etc. There's some humor, there's some very poignant moments. My thing would be branch out a little bit. It wasn't just Dambusters.
No, definitely, and I'll bring in Dan as well. But I think that's a good point, and I've thought of a couple of other questions as we are going through things quicker than we thought we would. But Dan, anything that we haven't mentioned so far that you've been, really busting to get off your chest about this and how we should reanalyze things?
Well, it's this idea of mine that I keep telling all my students. I always think it's more complicated than that. The bombing war is difficult heritage, but probably in the UK, it's been oversimplified. It's been I mean, it doesn't matter, if you're on the receiving end of a bomb, it doesn't matter whether it's being dropped by a precision attack or by an area bombing attack. It's one and the same. And I think we need to start to question more the way the bombing war has been remembered, and bear in mind that it does change. It doesn't have to be the way that it is being remembered now, because it's been remembered slightly different from how it was in the past. So, the IBCC, the 3 R's of the IBCC, recognition, remembrance, and reconciliation. I think we need a lot more of the reconciliation. So we're trying to tell the stories of the people, as James said, in the air, on the ground, military and civilian, on both sides of the conflict. And it's too easy, I think, to sometimes just play to the gallery and just hit the anniversary narratives. I mean, we're guilty of doing this ourselves, but tonight, I think, but we're trying to be a little bit more thoughtful about it. So it's with the dams operation, it is thinking about the 1,600 plus who were killed by the flood, and not just the 53 who were flying the aircraft. Incidentally, I looked up on the IBCC losses database, which has the names of everyone who lost their lives serving with Bomber Command during the war, and there were 20 other people killed on the night of the 16th, 17th of May 1943 who don't get remembered, and these were. There's a couple of Whitley crews and a Wellington crew who were lost on supposedly training operations, because they were flying from operational training units. But one was lost on a gardening operation, mining, and another one was on a anti-submarine sweep in the Bay of Biscay. There were a couple of Irks, an AC-1 and an AC-2 who died in hospital of something or other. We don't know, but it's this idea of trying to look for the individual stories rather than focusing on the poster boys and Guy Gibson. I don't think it flew over tonight, because looking out the window, it has just rained, but the BBMF Lancaster was due to fly over the 27 bomber stations of Lincolnshire this evening as part of the remembrance. So I mean, I'm always slightly bemused as to why the Lancaster is part of the Battle of Britain memorial flight. But also, I mean, it's great that the idea that the Lancaster was going to fly to remember the Dambusters raid, the Operation Chastise.
No, it is. And I've always had that thought about the Battle of Britain memorial flight, because We talked about this ourselves, didn't we, James? I think the first time you were on is the Battle of Britain, and Alan Allport, we talked about it, it's the defense of the British Isles at its heart. Okay, there was an offensive element to it as well, but it was the defense of the British Isles. So we were I wasn't involved at all. But the pilots, the air crews, the observer corps, everybody, they were involved in defending Britain's shores. Whereas the bomber offensive was taking that war to other people in various methods under various objectives, with different people having different ideas about how the bombers should be used. But the Lancaster as being part of that, is that, James, part of us again moving the Lancaster into an area of history that makes us feel more comfortable? Probably.
And I imagine initially it was kind of by accident, because if it was up to me, a Battle of Britain Memorial flight would have a Wellington or a Blenheim. I got a Blenheim in here. You know, because they were attacking the Luftwaffe airfields, the Battle of the Barges, etc., etc. But by 1945, if they hadn't been shot down or crashed in training accidents or scrapped, there weren't many around, and no one was interested in having them. On the flip side, you still had the Lancaster. You know, a few were mothballed, and it, because of the development and growth of RAF Bomber Command over the Second World War, there are more Lancasters anyway. And Harris has a thing about Lancasters, and there are plenty being built and produced. It just happens to survive, and they go, okay, let's put it in with the Battle of Britain Memorial flight as an overall symbol of the RAF and the Second World War and such like. And yeah, it ends up as that. The Lancaster in many ways has become the symbol of RAF Bomber Command. The Battle of Britain Memorial flight, as I say, plays a part. It plays a part in films as well, because it's always the Lancaster in films. Yeah, I think there's a number of factors that come into that. And yeah, maybe there is this trying to associate the Lancaster with the Battle of Britain, which is, as you say, a defensive war. I mean, I've argued otherwise many times, including on here. But yeah, for the popular collective memory, that's definitely the thing, isn't it?
That's the simple narrative. Yeah. But my point was, you know, the Lancaster was going to fly, or possibly it did. I don't know. I didn't hear it. It was going to fly over 27 operational stations in Lincolnshire, you know, Bomber County. So obviously, the Lancaster and the Dams operation this evening, today, this anniversary, is symbolic for the, you know, all of Bomber Command. But then, you know, why didn't it also fly over the stations in Yorkshire and Cambridgeshire and Norfolk as well? So, you know, it's the thing that I want, you know, people to do is to think a little bit about the story that is being told, and what just seems to be obvious, because it's not obvious and it can change, and perhaps we should change. I think we need to encourage people to engage more with, you know, the unpleasant, disturbing side of history, rather than, you know, just oversimplifying it and thinking of it as men and machines against an inanimate concrete wall.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I've used the example of the Lancaster numerous times to people about the fact that I literally at the same time have two feelings when I see it. That the 10-year-old boy in me gets all excited, and I look at it and I feel all incredibly British and incredibly patriotic, and I the hairs that I don't have on the back of my neck stand up, and I feel my chest swells, and I look at it. And then the other half of me, at exactly the same time, coursing through different veins in my body, looks at it as a machine of war that brought death to untold thousands. And in my head, it's okay to have those two feelings at the same time. That's how I feel as a host about something like World War II TV. I'm very proud of being able to bring history to people. I also sometimes think, like as a tour guide, you know, you're making money. You're death tourism. You know, every time a tour guide takes a group of people to a war cemetery, they are making money taking people to where people died for a cause, or just died because they were conscripted and didn't want to be there at all. And it's okay to have those feelings. It's okay to have those thoughts at the same time. Our problem these days is there's no room for nuance, is there? So, James, we're going to Phil's going to join. Is that the same feeling you have? I think, knowing you as I do, I think that is exactly the feeling you have, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm going to talk about a fighter here very briefly. When I sat in a Spitfire, I was a 10-year-old boy going, "Oh my goodness, I'm sitting in a Spitfire." Jumped into it. And the guy was talking me through, you know, its service history. So, it shot down an FW-190, September 44, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, goodness me, yeah, I'm behind a killing machine. I just didn't think, you know, there's the gun button in front of me. There are the cannons. And when he shut the hood as well, I suddenly felt, and I'm not claustrophobic at all, I suddenly felt, oh my goodness, imagine being trapped in this thing when it's on fire. So I had a whole mixture of emotions coming over, as well as that 10-year-old boy going, it's a Spitfire, which I still do now when I see one or when I hear one. And the same with the Lancaster. It's a very similar sort of experience.
Yeah. Colin just corrected me. My friend said, no, Woody, we spend the day taking people to where that people died, the cemeteries where they rest in peace. That's a very good way of looking at it. Well, Phil is kind of there, but we can't see or hear him yet. So gremlins are really coming in to kind of besiege us today. But the other thing is, it may be coming in there. I don't know. But it is okay to have these complex things. So Dan, do you have the same complexity? You know, this is your job as well, isn't it? Dealing with Bomber Command on a daily basis. That's your job.
Yeah. It's an emotional roller coaster every day. You know, I'd start looking at news sources or listening to interviews. I mean, you sort of had a little bit of a slip, and when you were talking about the Allied forces, you sort of said "we" in inverted commas.
Yeah.
And it is so easy to unthinkingly do that, and and it is this idea of it's so the story of the dams operation is so entwined with the UK's national identity that it's going back to the operation and why people possibly don't think about what happened on the ground after the dams were breached. It's possibly because it's, you know, the goal was to breach the dams, and, you know, it is being used for, you know, there's the Carling Black Label football metaphor, isn't there? With the idea is to score the goal is to hit the dams, and then you can go home and forget about it. You know, and then as James said, it's part of a wider bombing campaign. That's that one evening. That's what we do. Then we forget about it and we go again the next day.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in very quickly, it is with fighting in the air, it is machine against machine, and that comes even in the First World War. It's developed in the First World War. You know, it's shooting at this thing with crosses on or roundels on. There's very little human interaction, and I was reading Lucy Noakes's book on dying in the Second World War. Lucy Noakes is my supervisor, and it talks about how air crews, there was a lot of dying alone. You know, there was a unique way of it. With it, so there's all these aspects where there is this othering, there is this distancing with the enemy and such. Like, sorry, Dan, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, I don't know what I was talking about actually. Just the picture that you've just put up there. This is it's from a photo album that came into the archive. I think it was somebody who was too tough, so he was in Germany at the end of the war, and, you know, it's a really early sort of record of people making almost the pilgrimage to go to the site to have a look to see. So, you know,
can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, we can hear you, Phil. We can't see you.
I've said the way that, you know, it's been remembered has changed, but it was, you know, it was the thing to do if you had the opportunity to visit the dams, even in, you know, 45, 46, which is quite interesting.
So we seem to have Dr. Philip Blood with us, who's over there in Aachen. So in lieu of Rob, our German, you live over there, living with a German, living in Germany. What's your feeling about this as someone who's spent the majority of your career in recent years over on the other side of the channel? Oh, now we can't hear us now. Oh, that was such a word. I worded that question so well as well. Never mind. Well, hopefully Phil will join us. We are beset with gremlins today. But James, the movie. Let's go back. We did talk about the movie, but I don't think we've addressed just how incredibly important that was for a generation, wasn't it? I mean, it had everything that we like in movies. It had a stirring theme tune. It had Richard Todd, who won the war in numerous roles in World War II. It had all that technology as well. And you're writing about movies now. So where does the Dambusters as a movie come in your appreciation of just how much it influenced the narrative?
Gosh, it's absolutely huge. Like I said, I think the movie in many senses. So it's originally a book by Paul Brickell, who wrote The Great Escape and Reach for the Sky, which have made into movies very successfully, similar sort of period. It comes at a time in the mid-1950s where there is this re-evaluation. There is this change in how the war is portrayed on film. It's becoming sort of like an officer's war. I mean, one thing that strikes me, the difference between the films in the war itself and something like Dambusters, for example, is how women are portrayed and shown in these films. So the Dambusters, you've got Barnes Wallace's wife, you've got some waff serving tea, but that's about it. Whereas if that had been made in the 1940s, it would have been a Target for Tonight. You've got waffs there having an active job, taking notes from the debrief, etc., etc. So, and the fact is, yeah, it's got the elements that we mentioned, the bonkersness of the bouncing bomb, the climax, the great music. It's in two halves. You've got Barnes Wallace's half, and then you've got Guy Gibson's half almost. So it jumps very, very quickly, and yeah, it just ticks a lot of boxes. And it's also, as opposed to something like Appointment in London, which I mentioned earlier, it's low level. It's not at that high level, just dropping bombs. It's dropping a bomb and trying to do precision and flying at low level. There's all this daringness to it. So there are all these elements that come into it as well.
No, definitely. It has all the things to be a movie that you can celebrate, if that's not the right word. Those aspects, the flying, the ingenuity, we've talked about it before, but we have finally got Phil now. So thanks for coming off the subs bench for us. So there you are. You're over in Germany, Phil. Has there been any coverage of the Dambusters raid in the Aachen press today?
Not that I noticed.
So what's your reaction? You live over there. You worked over there.
We're not on the flight path. I have actually seen two Lancasters in Aachen. One was in the model shop, and the other one was in an exhibition for the 19th anniversary of 1944, which was about 8 years ago. It was a black model without any insignia or anything, and it kind of symbolized the German attitude to Lancasters. They're not liked over here. Although one day I was coming home and my elderly neighbor turned to me and said, "You're not looking so good. Are you feeling rough?" And I said, "Well, no, it's just that we've had a lot of rain upstairs." And she said, "Well, back in the day when you Tommies blew our roofs off, we all had bronchitis." So yeah, it's not a subject that you talk about very lightly over here in Germany. I mean, some of the older generation mentioned it, but also felt for some reason they would say how bad it was, but didn't want to blame you. It was yeah, we know how bad it was, and you perhaps appreciate how bad it was because you're a historian, but we don't want to make too much of it. Then, of course, there was a period when, I don't know if you remember this, but around about 2000, 2010, there were many bombs being found. And there was a huge explosion in Munich, which reawakened stories about the bombing and how the bombing had been. And then it disappeared again. And it's quite interesting. In the last few years, almost all the stories of the bombing have completely vanished from Aachen. And Aachen had been bombed 173 times in the 4 years of the war. One of the first to be bombed in 1940, 2 days after the agreement. Apparently Churchill gave the agreement to bomb. I think they were already working that way, because I think, as James will tell you, the Royal Air Force was trying to bomb the railway lines and the tanks and the oil tanks and what have you. So there was a long history of the bombing in this area, and of course, being in the Rhineland, this part of Germany was at the forefront. So when there was stories of bombing, it was very rare to hear about the Dambusters.
Right. Okay.
It was just never turned up, and yeah, I'm kind of betwixt and between, because obviously with my dad having been an Ambrose man, we were brought up with the Lancaster being such a great beast, and of course the Queenie that's in the museum was one of the ones on my great uncle's production line at Vickers, Avro Vickers, not Avro Vickers. I can't remember, Metropolitan Vickers in Manchester.
Right.
And so there were those kind of family ties. And so to a certain extent, when I moved to Germany, I was perhaps a little bit more on the side of bombing worked. But over the years, after 20 years and more of living here, I've kind of gone the other way. And of course, the research I did on Aachen, looking not just at the raids individually, but the whole policy that went around it, the operational research papers, and of course, being able to read the mathematics of those papers, you very quickly began to understand that assumption was being used to override profound statistical decision. Yeah. So they were substituting make-believe to assume results which weren't happening. And of course, if you listen to some of the guys who were in the operational research teams, they were talking about how they completely missed things like the famous upward firing machine guns on the German night fighters. So a lot of that story for me is, as I've kind of shifted from the British approach to a more central approach with some understanding of the Germans, I feel that there is a possible argument for the bombing up to 1943.
Okay.
And then after that, it kind of becomes vicious. And, you know, the arson raids, they start here in Aachen because Aachen's a test bed for a lot of raids. And the Aachen fire raid, which was marked as arson in the military records as they were, you know, posting the decision to go out to attack Aachen, it was listed as an arson raid. And when you read words like that, you become very concerned because it means they're ignoring what is quite clearly a war crime. And when you're mass burning, you're not just dehousing.
Well, it's interesting you said war crime, because if one of the points Rob was going to bring up today, if he managed to get through, was the question of whether or not the dams raid could be classified a war crime, and if not, why not? And I knew it was going to kind of put some some people's backs up saying that there, but civilian deaths, there's different ways of interpreting it. But we're not talking about the bomber offensive as a big subject, because we'll be here all night. But Phil, you saw the earlier chat there. You've got knowledge of the Dambusters raid yourself because you're British and you're living in Germany. But what's your answer to the question about was the raid worth it? So not looking at the wider combined bomber offensive, but the Dams raid. You've read a lot about things. You've studied this. Was it worth it, and by what metric would you measure that?
Well, if you use the formula which strategic analysts use, which is you've got a strategic force, you have a strategic target, what is the strategic outcome? And the problem with that formula is it's correct that the bombers are the strategic force and the dams are a strategic target, a relative words today. It is an acceptable strategic target.
Right.
Okay. The problem is the outcome wasn't a strategic outcome. Yeah. Because, okay, there's killing the civilians, there's killing the POWs, but what's the strategic impact? Well, lots of people like to say, well, Churchill spoke about it in Washington, D.C., and there was the propaganda and all the rest of it. But really, when you boil it down, what's the strategic impact? And the strategic impact was minimal. So it constitutes a poor strategic choice. And I would say where the problem lies is when they were in the planning, they assumed too much. Therefore, the strategic planning wasn't so much strategic planning in the traditional sense where, you're planning for a battle like Montgomery would do with all the processes. What they've done is they've assumed that if you break the dams, the Rhineland's not going to work. Well, that's a poor assumption. So on that first hand, I would say it's not a war crime, it's an acceptable target. But when you look at the process, it wasn't very successful.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like what you're saying there. And again, it's this interesting way we're measuring it. And James, one of the things that came to me earlier on is the crews. The crews that were on that raid, they were, as the legend says, some of the best crews across RAF Bomber Command, and the loss rates, as Dan said, were catastrophic. Well, you both said were catastrophic for what was a single raid. Is there any argument, James, for having to not use those crews on that raid and spread crews around Bomber Command with a better idea of low-level flying, with a better idea of precision, and spread that knowledge base across? Or am I barking up a wrong tree entirely? And I'll ask the same question to Dan. But James, is that nonsense, or is that have I got something?
They weren't quite all elite crews, and
Right.
or highly. They did have experience. There were some that didn't have as much experience. That's again a little bit of a myth.
Part of the narrative.
Yeah. Another thing to think about with 5 group. Dan mentioned gardening earlier, minesweeping. That was low level over water, which 5 group, that was one of the regular tasks they did. So they were doing it almost, or not quite nightly, but very, very regularly. So that again is not really unique element. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes. So in that sense, yeah, there really isn't.
Okay. So anything you want to react to Phil's comments there about, now we've gone back to the idea of measuring the success or otherwise at a raid. Anything that sprung to your mind as a reaction to what Phil said? Dan or James?
Well, I mean, without really going into counterfactuals, it would have been different if they'd got the SORPA as they'd hoped. That would have made a bit more of a difference, I think. Your point about, would the men and the aircraft be better used? I mean, 2 TAF or 2 group, and then later on 2 TAF were always hitting, low-level precision targets.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're thinking of the DAMS crews as being put on the pedestal and being the elite. There were lots of other air crew who would, in a similar situation, who were asked and expected to do the same sort of thing. And at this point of time in the war, it was a mill grinding through the people. They were being trained, they were being sent to operational squadrons. They were, the chop rate was high. I mean, this operation in particular, it's going back to almost the first days of the war when they were trying to fly daylight operations with Wellingtons. It was totally unsustainable. But there were other operations with equally unsustainable loss rates later on, and they carried on. So, I think we have to, we have to start to try and focus on everybody who took part rather than just these few individuals and this one operation.
I mean, it's essentially what the way I would then word it, having got it wrong, is that we're not saying. It's not that those crews were exceptionally good. It's that other crews were also equally good, and we have dropped their ability in as we over celebrate possibly the Dambusters crews. Yeah. We've allowed our impression of the other crews to maybe drop. Is that's what's happened over the years? We've failed to recognise that at its core there are some skilled crews across Bomber Command, indeed across the services generally. And these guys were good, but they weren't necessarily much as big a gap between them and the other crews as our collective memory has made us think. Is that where we're going with this?
Yeah, I think so. And one thing that's just come to mind is the fact that we've had the focus on the last Dambuster is very similar to the focus on the last Tommy when it comes to the First World War, which says a lot about when we were talking about the collective public memories. There is this strong connection. There is this sense of identity that's linked to the Dambusters. And the squadron, and that focus is not only detrimental to other crews, to other squadrons. As I said earlier, it's also to 617 Squadron that I would argue actually did more useful things later on. I'm probably going to get attacked for that, but when you look at the deception range and you look at the V weapon attacks, aqueducts, etc., as I mentioned, Turpits as well as another one. I mean, that's up for debate as well, but there were other things
by 9 Squadron
and 9 Squadron as well. There are these things to consider which aren't remembered. 617 Squadron are the Dambusters, so
yeah,
it's not just detriment to Bomber Command. Other squadrons, it's also just 617 itself in a strange way.
So I think to sort of we'll go back round to each three of you again. I think to kind of sum things up and bring things to an end. It's not that any of us are saying we shouldn't be talking about this. It's that we're saying we should be talking about it. Everything that can, we shouldn't just be looking through this narrow prism of just the Dambusters raid. The considerations as we move forward should be about reconciliation. Look at the German point of view, the British point of view, the global point of view. Look at other operations and use the Dambusters raid as a jumping off point to more discussions rather than just ending it with May the 16th, because that's the thing. In a couple of days' time, all the social media coverage of this will go again, and we'll be talking about whatever we're talking next week. And there's more mileage, I think, to be discussing the combined bomber offensive and all the nuance there. And just to say, using Dambusters as a starting point. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like, I got into this, through airfix models, and, later generations are getting into this sort of thing through playing computer games. It's great that we're getting people's interest, but it's up to us as historians and storytellers to try and keep their interest and engage them, so they actually, go away and start finding out stuff for themselves and thinking a little bit more about what they think they know, I guess.
Yeah, Phil, any points about what I said there about using the Dambusters raid as a portal to a wider conversation?
Yeah, I think I don't dismiss it as not an important part of the history. I just think it's become disproportionate. I mean, there's all this story about Guy Gibson, but where's the story about Leonard Cheshire?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that always strikes me as odd. I mean, I was lucky to meet Cheshire and Noble Franklin, and they struck me as these incredibly gifted individuals who were brilliantly trained in what they could do. And, if you read the stories or you listen to the stories of Leonard Cheshire, who's this master bomber flying around the target, he's hovering there while all of this is going on, and he's quite rationally calm. And you're thinking, wow, but why isn't that being projected as the story of the Royal Air Force? Why do we go back to Guy Gibson? And I mean, they were great crews. They were very impressive.
Well, I think we like Guy Gibson because he died. I mean, there's that dying at his peak aspect. There's that died so young. I mean, you could easily make the point. I'll bring down Leonard Cheshire, and you're right there. Not only is he involved in this, but of course he's involved in Nagasaki and what have you later on in the war. And he also did some amazing stuff in, however you want to call it, humanitarian terms, charity work after. He's a much more all-encompassing hero. And I'm not saying Guy Gibson isn't heroic. I'm just saying that Leonard Cheshire has a lot more qualities. So there, James, why aren't we talking about Leonard Cheshire?
I completely agree. I think it's been that Gibson died at a young age. There's a lot of, he's still young. It's that forever young thing, isn't it? I guess with him as well. Whereas Cheshire, grew old, and his book Bomber Pilot is fantastic and absolutely fascinating. And I'm glad Phil brought Cheshire up, actually, because I think he was part of the Bomber Command narrative and definitely a figure until he passed away. And all of a sudden he's faded away. And I think we do need to start talking about people like Cheshire again. I completely agree. And of course, he led 617 Squadron later on. So there is that direct link and such like. And I mean, totally agree with you, Doc.
Apart from Appointment in London, there's no film about Cheshire, though, is there?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, and then it's not direct, is it? It's not.
No, he's alluded to in the character. But so I live in France. Phil, you live in Germany. Dan, James, you travel about. You're both in Britain. Let's end on the note of reconciliation, because I think that would be a nice message to send out. Do you think Britain and Germany and Europe are are capable of moving together towards a better understanding and kind of forgiving each other for our past and looking at that. I mean, there was a lot of death on both sides, but are we stepping towards that, or do you think we're not going to do that? Dan, I'll go to you first.
I think it all too often. I think when there is an effort at reconciliation, it's coming from Germany. I mean, the people who are putting up memorials to Lancaster crashes. I'd like to think that's where we can go, and it's certainly the work I'm trying to do with the IVCC Digital Archive is aimed at reconciliation. I think it's something that I think time and distance are going to help. I'm not sure if we want to go as far as when I remember 2005. It was the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar, and there was a sort of reenactment with that sort of made it down into blue and red forces against each other. I don't think we want to go quite that far, but I think we do need to move in that direction.
I mean, so people are saying there has been reconciliation, but I'm thinking that the England fans who go overseas with cheap fighter pilot, Battle of Britain, Dambusters, goggles and stuff, thinking the team to that they're not helping with reconciliation, are they? Definitely. I mean, okay, that's not maybe a representative sway of the British public, but all the time that's going on, I don't think reconciliation is on those people's cards. But James, reconciliation, are we going to move that? Are we? Some people are saying we're there already. What's your feeling about it?
I think there are movements. I think there have been movements towards it. I think there has been a shift slightly away from it personally, and perspective of change. I'm very intrigued to see what things are like in 20 years, because as we saw with the First World War and the centenary, things did change. There were new perspectives that came in. There were projects across nations and such like. I'd be very interested to see what that's like. I don't think I could really say anything else, really.
Bill, you're over there in Germany. Reconciliation. Are we finished? Are we there? Is there room for maneuver? Where do you think we are?
I think it could have been possible if we hadn't had what happened in 2016 with the Brexit election.
Oh dear. We were hoping not to mention that.
And I'm going to say why. What actually happened is you've got this conservative attitude towards being so extreme from Europe that you actually see this constant flow. We pick it up quite often over here of people going on about the Germans, the Conservative Party going on about the Germans. And that to me is the biggest hurdle to reconciliation, because it's not the ordinary British people who are coming over here and visiting. As you know, when you came over, Woody, everybody loves the Brits and there's a great relationship and everybody has a great time. But then you wake up next morning and you discover that David Cameron has been going on about the Blitz with Angela Merkel, or Boris Johnson has mentioned something about bombing so-and-so. And it just puts a dampener on the thing. That the ordinary folk, everybody wants to have normality, go back to good old days, and remember the wars, but don't go overkill. For me, it's the politicians who are the big hurdle in all of this. They've done nothing but bring about this crazy nationalism. And of course,
it's undeniable. Whatever side of the spectrum we are, and we probably have people watching this who are in the UK who voted for both sides of that. What's definitely undeniable is travel is more difficult. Things are generally more difficult. I have big queues at Eurostar now that I didn't have in the past, and things like that. So people are mentioning cities being twinned, Coventry and Dresden or something. Doing exchange programs will be slightly more complicated. It won't be impossible, but it'll be slightly more complicated than it was 5-6 years ago. And there is a different. It's definitely driven a wedge. It's not necessarily permanent, and things can get better. But Brexit, although it is a bit of an elephant in the room, we can't deny it hasn't made things easier. It certainly hasn't made this aspect of understanding World War II from our different lenses any easier. So I think we will leave it at that. But you know, it's been an interesting conversation. I'm hoping we will bring Rob back in at some point and continue it. But the Dambusters raid, I hope no one's seemed to be upset with anything anyone's been said today. I think we're all taking on board some ideas, and I think our closing messages is there's more to this story than just what sometimes has been in the social media. It's more complex, there's more nuance, and there's other areas and viewpoints, and particularly those of the German civilians and those from other side of the channel, other side of where you are. I'm on the other side of the channel. You're on the other side of the channel. Anyway, folks, it's been a fantastic conversation. Don't forget that there will now, once this show has processed, so in about 12 hours time, the little button will appear for thanks. If you want to give us buy us a coffee, you can use the thanks button. It's not there when we're doing it live. It appears about a day later, and views are up, so that's fantastic. So don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to follow the work of James and Dan and Philip Blood and Rob, even when he joins us, because they're doing sterling work all the time. Thank you for the photos, Dan, and thank you everybody for watching. This is Paul Weller for World War II TV saying I will see you all again tomorrow. Cheers everybody. Bye.